Picture a man who owns nothing at all. No money in his pockets, no passport in his name, not even a homeland he is allowed to return to. His body still carries the marks of 2 bullets from the battlefield. 2 separate nations have already thrown him out. And now he walks into a foreign city empty-handed, holding on to the only thing left to him, the stubborn refusal of a soldier who will not surrender. He had never held a craftsman's tools. He had never spent a single day as an apprentice in any trade. Life handed him no starting money, no skill, no connections. Nothing whatsoever. Logic points to one obvious conclusion. A penniless, stateless refugee who cannot even make a watch could never build a brand that kings would chase. Right? Now remember this name, Antoni Patek. This is the man behind what many call the greatest watchmaking house in the history of the world, Patek Philippe. Their watches were fastened to the wrist of Queen Victoria, of Albert Einstein, of the composer Tchaikovsky. This house holds 9 of the top 10 spots on the list of the most expensive watches ever sold at auction. Feel that number for a second. Not one, not half of them. 9 out of 10. Their most complex piece once sold for $31 million. A single object, on a single evening in Geneva. Stop here for a moment. Let that settle. Almost the entire summit of the most expensive watches on Earth belongs to one company. The 10th spot is a Rolex, and that is all. Every other watchmaker alive competes for the space where Patek Philippe stands completely alone. At the very top, and at the base of that mountain, is a man who had no francs, no country, no profession. How? How did a broke Polish exile become the watchmaker of monarchs? That is what we are going to untangle today. And let me say it up front, this story is not about watches. It is about something no amount of money can buy, about the thing that either lives inside a person or does not live there at all. I will walk you through his entire life, from the point where, by every law of common sense, he had no chance, through the war that forged his backbone, through the trade he forced his way into knowing nothing, through his most terrible fall at 43, when he was left with nothing all over again, through a single day in London that did more than any money ever could, and down to a secret almost no one has heard, how everything he built nearly dissolved into nothing, and who held it together in the final second. Stay with me to the end. There is one short line written in 1896 that stopped people cold when they read it. And by the finish, you will understand why it is not advertising at all, but one man's entire life pressed into a single sentence. But first, the beginning. I know what you are thinking right now. Another success story. He probably just got lucky. A rich father, the right friends, money to start with. That is how it always goes. Here is why, this time, it is different. Antoni Patek had none of that. None of it. And I am not talking about a dressed-up version of a hard childhood. I am talking about the literal, complete loss of everything a person can possibly lose. Watch how his life unfolded. 16 years old, and his father dies. The one pillar the family leaned on. The man who carried the family name and held the whole future on his shoulders. Gone. 19 years old, and he flees his own country. Not on a journey. He runs for his life because an empire is hunting him and has branded him an enemy. Stay, and it is prison or death. 22 years old, and he is thrown out of a second country. Out of France, which had sheltered him for a while. Expelled at the demand of the very same empire that had hunted him before. And the hardest one. 43 years old, and the business he built with his own hands over 6 years collapses. Alone again. From zero again. And this time, no longer a young man. Stay here. Do not scroll past this. Because the whole point is hidden, right in this spot. Most people break after the very first blow like that. Lose everything once, and a person never gets back up. They find 100 reasonable excuses to let their hands fall. Circumstances. Bad luck. The world is against me. Now imagine a man taking those blows one after another. Homeland, father, home, first business. All of it stripped from him before he turned 50. And every single time he stood back up. Every time. Without one exception. Let us step out of the 19th century for a moment. Let us talk about you. You probably have a problem right now that feels like a full stop. You were fired. A project you poured a year of your life and your savings into went up in smoke. Maybe you are past 40, looking at people your age and thinking, my train has left, it is too late to start over. So here it is. Patek founded the company that made him immortal at nearly 40, and he closed the deal of his life pushing 60. By then he had already lost his homeland, his father, and his first business. He was no prodigy, and he was not the one who invented the revolutionary mechanism. That was an entirely different man, and we will get to him. Patek was the kind who takes the hit, stands up, takes another, and stands up again. That trait cannot be taught and cannot be bought, but it can be woken up inside you. And by the end of this story, you will know exactly what a person who has it looks like. To understand where it comes from, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a country that had officially already vanished from the map. Poland, 1812. The country he was born into was more of a ghost than a country, a shadow, a memory of a nation that three great empires, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, had sliced up between themselves and erased from the map of Europe. Feel that. To be born in a place where your homeland officially does not exist. The people are alive, the language is alive, the faith, the songs, the history, all of it lives on. But on the map of the world, your country is not there. It has been crossed out. What was left was officially called the Duchy of Warsaw, a puppet state on a knife's edge. On one side, the fading ambitions of Napoleon. On the other, a Russian Tsar who wanted every trace of Polish freedom burned out forever. A wretched place to build a peaceful life, and a perfect one to forge a character. Antoni was born into a noble Polish family, in the village of Piaski Slakecki near Lublin, in the east of what is now Poland. His line carried the ancient Praudzich coat of arms, ancient, proud, and almost useless in a world that kept shifting violently under their feet. Feel the paradox, a noble name, centuries of honor, and almost no money and no protection. Here is the first lesson of this story, and it still holds today. A title on paper is worth nothing when the world around you is collapsing. A fine name does not feed anyone. An ancient coat of arms does not stop a bullet. The only thing that matters is what is inside a person. While still a boy, Antoni moved with his family to Warsaw, into the beating heart of what remained of the Polish soul, an electric and dangerous city where a conversation about freedom could cost you your freedom. It was here that the boy became a man, and in the spring of 1828, everything blew apart. His father died. Antoni was 16, sit with the weight of that moment. His father was the pillar the family stood on, the keeper of the name, the guarantor of the future. And now he was gone. Most young men would have folded under that weight, withdrawn into themselves. Antoni did the exact opposite. Within weeks of burying his father, weeks, not years, the 16-year-old made a decision that shaped everything that followed. On the 1st of March, 1828, he enlisted in the Polish 1st Mounted Rifles Regiment. Feel the weight of it. He was so young there was barely anything to shave. He had just buried his father, and he volunteered for one of the most dangerous roles in an army locked in permanent smoldering conflict with the most powerful empire in Eastern Europe. Why? A boy who has just lost his father, walking straight into the line of fire, for what? For something larger than himself, for Poland. There is a truth hidden here that touches you personally. What makes a person strong is not the absence of blows. Everyone takes blows, you included. What makes a person strong is where they aim the pain. Most people aim it inward, into self-pity, into resentment, into hunting for someone to blame. The rare ones aim it outward, into action, into work, into service to something bigger. Orphaned at 16, Antoni did not hide. He took the pain of that loss and poured it into the cause he believed in, into his country. Ask yourself honestly, the last time life hit you, where did you aim the pain? Inward to chew on it, or outward into action? That fork is exactly what separates the people who break from the people who build empires. For 2 years he drilled, trained, and waited. And in November of 1830, the spark caught. History would call it the November Uprising, the moment an entire generation of young Poles decided the occupation was not to be endured, but thrown off. Across Warsaw, officers and students took up arms. The rebellion spread like fire through dry grass. Polish regiments clashed with Russian forces the length of the country, and Antoni Patek was right in the middle of it. He fought for months, he was shot twice, and both times he returned to the fight. Feel that. Wounds that send most men home with a clear conscience did nothing to his resolve. Shot, and he came back. Shot again, and he came back again. On the 27th of February, 1831, for what his commanders described as extraordinary heroism under fire, he was promoted to second lieutenant. And on the 3rd of October that same year, he was decorated with the Golden Cross of the Virtuti Militari, the highest military honor Poland could grant. He earned every gram of it the hardest possible way. In campaigns stretching from the outskirts of Warsaw to the forests and marshes of a country fighting for its life against impossible odds. And then the uprising was lost. On the 5th of October, 1831, Russian forces swept back into Warsaw and crushed the rebellion. The Tsar issued his decrees. Anyone who had raised a weapon against the empire was now a marked man. And the hero of the resistance faced a simple and brutal choice: stay and be imprisoned, or run. He ran, and it was not cowardice. Any officer reading the situation clearly understood the fight was lost, at least for now. The task now was one thing only: survive, reach safety, wait for the next hour. So Antoni joined what history would call the Great Emigration. A wave of more than 10,000 Polish exiles poured west into France, desperate for asylum. In late 1831, he arrived in Paris, 19 years old, speaking Polish and carrying a chest of medals that meant nothing in a foreign city. Feel the contrast. Yesterday, a hero, an officer, a bearer of the nation's highest honor. Today, nobody. A nameless refugee whose medals cannot be eaten or traded for a roof. To survive, he took work as a typesetter in a printing house, setting other people's words by hand, one small lead letter at a time. Not the life of a decorated lieutenant, but it kept him alive. And for a while, that was enough. It did not last. By 1834, the reach of the Russian Empire had stretched all the way to Paris. The Tsar was pressing France to expel anyone suspected of ongoing revolutionary activity. And Patek, personally decorated for fighting Russia, was exactly the man France now wanted gone. He was forced out. Again he packed what he could carry. Again he moved. Count with me, his father, his homeland, his military honor, worthless in exile, and now a second country, briefly his home. 22 years old, and back to absolute zero. I know what you are thinking. How many times can a man be knocked down before he stays down? Patek would be knocked down twice more, and the worst fall was still ahead. But this time he arrived somewhere different, somewhere that would change everything. Geneva. Switzerland was different. Neutral ground, sheltered from the great imperial politics that kept rearranging the lives of men like him. And it held something he desperately needed: a large, tight-knit community of Polish exiles. People who look after one another the way only those who have lost everything together can. Antoni found shelter. He found community. For the first time in years, he found solid ground beneath his feet. And he quietly asked himself the question that would redirect the rest of his life. What do you build when you have nothing left to build with? And Geneva whispered back a single word: watches. To understand how mad that idea was, you have to grasp what he was walking into. Geneva in the 1830s was the undisputed world capital of mechanical watchmaking. For 2 centuries, its masters had shrunk gears down to sizes the eye cannot follow, perfected escapements, and turned tiny wheels of brass and steel into objects of
What
breathtaking
makes a
precision.
person strong is where
Watchmaking
they
here was
aim the
not an
pain.
industry. It was a culture,
Most people aim
an
it
obsession
inward.
fused into the very soul of the city. Craft was not merely respected here. It was expected of anyone serious about building something that lasts. And Antoni had no training, no apprenticeship, not a single family tie to the trade. Zero. It is like a man off the street who has never held a scalpel deciding to become the finest surgeon in the world. In a city where surgery has been a family business for 200 years. It sounds like a guaranteed failure. Here is why it was not. He had no trade, but he had 3 things worth more than any skill: the discipline of a soldier who had survived war, a man who could do the hard thing day after day when every cell begged him to stop, the pride of a nobleman who refused to be defined by what he lacked, and a deep, almost desperate need to build something that no empire and no exile could ever take away again. That third thing is the engine of the whole story. Most of us have the luxury of building a life slowly, making mistakes, starting over. Antoni had no such luxury. Everything had already been taken from him. So he searched for the one thing that could not be seized. Mastery poured into his own hands and his own name. When a man has nothing to lose but something to hold on to, he becomes dangerously unstoppable. And he began to learn, not quickly and not easily, but with the steady, relentless patience of a man who had run out of places to retreat to. That phrase, out of places to retreat to, is the key. Do you know why most people quit halfway? Because there is always somewhere to fall back to. A plan B, a comfortable it did not work out, I will do something else. Antoni had no plan B. Behind him, burned bridges in 2 countries. Ahead of him, master the trade or remain nobody forever. He embedded himself in the watchmaking community, he watched the masters, he asked questions. He absorbed everything within reach. He learned the language of the trade, escapements, balance wheels, jeweled bearings, tourbillons, and understood not just what watches were, but why the finest ones differ from the rest in substance, not in quantity. Over several years of patient self-education, he developed enough understanding to see what mattered most. And here is the single most important idea in this part. Stop. Let it settle. He discovered that his past, as a military officer and a nobleman, gave him something most trained craftsmen lacked. Access. Access to the aristocratic and diplomatic circles where these expensive watches are actually bought. He knew how to move in those rooms. He understood luxury from the inside. And he drew a conclusion that 99 people out of 100 would have missed. The missing ingredient in his plan was not his own technical skill. He did not need to become the finest watchmaker in Geneva. He needed to understand what the finest watchmaking on earth could be, and to refuse anything below that standard from the people working beside him. Most people, feeling weak at something, either spend years patching that weakness without talent, or quit, saying this is not for me. Antoni did a third thing. He honestly admitted where he was strong and where he was not. His strength was taste, connections, vision, and an unbending standard. His weakness was the hands of a watchmaker. So he stopped patching the weakness and set out to find the man whose strength would fill that gap. That is real entrepreneurial thinking. Not I will do it all myself, but I know what must be done, and I will accept nothing short of perfection. On the 1st of May, 1839, in a modest workshop in the heart of Geneva, Antoni officially entered the watch business. Together with Franciszek Czapek, a fellow Polish exile and, unlike him, an actual trained watchmaker, he founded Patek, Czapek and Company, a manufacturing house built by 2 refugees. No safety net, no wealthy patrons, a combined history of loss that would have broken most men twice over. From day one, Patek ran the business by a single rule: quality above all. Not good enough, not adequate, but excellence at every level. He would rather make fewer watches and charge accordingly than flood the market with competent but ordinary pieces. In an industry of endless compromise, he refused to compromise. And that stubbornness, the very thing that twice sent him back into the line of fire, now sent him back to the bench, demanding he redo a part another man would have called good enough. But the early years were brutal. Swiss rules required the gold in cases to be at least 18 carats, which drove costs sharply higher. Getting finished watches across borders was a logistical nightmare. Customs seizures and unreliable middlemen regularly devoured the margins. And there was the partnership itself, carrying the seeds of its own collapse from the start. Patek and Czapek were both proud men, forged by the same war and the same exile. The same nationality, language, history of suffering, but very different visions of where the company should go. The disagreements piled up over years and hardened into something that could not be smoothed over. On the 18th of April, 1845, after 6 years of struggle, the partnership was formally dissolved. Understand what that moment cost. He had survived a revolution, 2 bullets, exile from Poland, expulsion from France, the agonizing restart from zero in a foreign language. He had spent 6 years building this business with his own hands, and now the business was gone. 43 years old, no partner, no company, no obvious way forward. Alone again, the fourth blow of one life and the cruelest because it landed on a man no longer young. For a weaker man, that would have been the end. But 1 year before the collapse, something had happened that Patek himself may not have fully grasped at the time. Something that would quietly become the most consequential event of his professional life. In the spring of 1844, before the breakup, Antoni travelled to Paris for the French Industrial Exposition. These fairs were the great innovation showcases of the century. Thousands of inventors, thousands of demonstrations, most of them forgotten within a week. And in that sea, Patek saw Jean-Adrien Philippe. A 30-year-old French watchmaker, he had invented something that sounds almost laughably simple, but was, in 1844, genuinely revolutionary. A mechanism that let a pocket watch be wound and set without any separate key at all. Understand why that mattered. Every pocket watch of the age needed a separate little key, a small tool you had to carry, easily lost or left at home. No key meant a dead watch, a simple, stupid, constant problem for the entire world. And Philippe eliminated it completely. One crown built into the case, one smooth motion. No key. Ever again. At the exposition he received a bronze medal for it. Respectable, but no sensation. The judges saw nothing extraordinary, and here is the moment that separates an ordinary man from one who builds empires. Antoni looked at the invention and saw what the judges had not. Not a clever refinement, but the future of an entire industry. He understood that in time, every watchmaker on the planet would adopt it. Thousands of people walked that hall. Professionals, experts, industrialists who knew the trade far better than the self-taught refugee. They all passed the bronze medal and forgot it. And a man with no formal education saw gold where the experts saw bronze. Why? Because he was not looking at the mechanism. He was looking at the person who would buy it. At an aristocrat sick of fumbling with a key. At the problem of a living customer. Experts are often in love with the technology itself. The one who wins is in love with the human problem that technology solves. Patek introduced himself. They talked at length and found in each other a rare, instant recognition, the kind where one man's strength is exactly where the other's weakness is. And here is the moment of choice. Antoni had a business that had just collapsed in his hands. 43. A sensible man would have licked his wounds and played it safe, afraid of another loss. Instead, within months of the collapse, he formed a new partnership, far more powerful. On the 15th of May, 1845, Jean-Adrien Philippe joined the company. Patek brought vision, salesmanship, deep connections in the world of luxury, and an unbending quality standard. Philippe brought technical genius and the most important watchmaking invention of the century. Each had exactly what the other lacked. Together they became something entirely new. On the 1st of January 1851, the company was officially renamed Patek Philippe and Company. The name itself was a declaration, a partnership of equals, a Polish exile and a French genius, bound by the conviction that the finest watches in the world had not yet been invented. In the summer of 1851, the world got its first real look at what they had made. In London, in Hyde Park, the great exhibition opened inside a vast building of glass called the Crystal Palace, the first true World's Fair, drawing over 6 million visitors across 5 months. 40 companies represented Switzerland. Patek Philippe was among them and brought its very best. The most precise and beautiful pocket watches, with that keyless mechanism, in gold cases with the finest enamel and rose-cut diamonds. And the jury awarded them the gold medal. In a hall gathering the finest the world had ever assembled under one roof, the work of 2 refugees was judged the finest of all. And then Queen Victoria walked in. Feel the full weight of this. Not a symbolic figure, but the most powerful woman on earth, monarch of an empire spanning a quarter of the globe, at the peak of Britain's imperial century. She had been shown the work of every great craftsman in Europe. She stopped at the Patek Philippe display. On the 19th of August, 1851, she bought watch number 4710, an azure blue pendant watch, its back hand-painted with a bouquet of rose-cut diamonds on sky blue enamel with a matching brooch. She paid 612 Swiss francs and 50 centimes. The same day, Prince Albert chose watch number 3218, a quarter-repeating pocket chronometer that chimed the time on demand for 1,325 francs. Stop here. A stateless refugee from Warsaw had just sold a watch to the Queen of England. The very man an empire had stripped of homeland, father, honor, and two homes. The man who set lead letters in a Paris printing house to keep from starving. Now he was dressing the monarch of the greatest empire on earth in his own watches. Then came the cascade. When Queen Victoria bought something, every court in Europe took notice. Monarchs and centuries-old dynasties wanted to know what their queen was wearing. And the royal commissions poured in. The Tsar of Russia, the King of Belgium, the ruler of Egypt, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, the King of Hungary, the Queen of Spain. Each name added a layer of legitimacy no advertising budget could ever buy. And here is the particular, almost cruel irony of one name. The man the Russian Empire had hunted as a dangerous revolutionary, an enemy of the state, was now the favored watchmaker of the Russian imperial court. The exile driven across two countries by imperial power was now supplying the very class that had spent decades trying to erase him from history. There is something darkly beautiful about that reversal. In a single day at the Crystal Palace, Antoni turned a gold medal into a dynasty. He built something that would outlive him by nearly a century and a half. And the company did not stop at the summit. Most people, reaching the peak, start defending it, afraid to lose what they earned. Patek Philippe did the opposite. It kept climbing to where no one had been. In 1868, it created the world's first wristwatch, designed for the wrist rather than the pocket. It was sold on the 13th of November, 1876, to a Hungarian noblewoman, Countess Koszkowicz. The mass market for wristwatches would not arrive until the next century, decades later. But when it did, Patek Philippe had already been there first. True leaders do not chase a trend once it has started. They are already there decades before the market realizes it needs it. The workshop kept pushing the boundaries of the possible. Perpetual calendars that accounted for leap years on their own. Minute repeaters that chimed the hour, the quarter, and the minute, so a blind man could tell time by ear. Split seconds chronographs timing two events at once. Each complication was a mountain climbed, another proof that the science of time was not yet finished. And it came not from a hunger for money, but from that same standard. Excellence has no ceiling. Now a story that shows how far that drive could go. In 1925, the company took a commission that would produce the most complicated mechanical watch in the world. Henry Graves Jr., an American banker and passionate collector, was locked in a quiet but fierce rivalry with another collector, James Ward Packard, over who could commission the most complicated pocket watch. Two of the richest men competing not with yachts, but with watches. And Graves went to Geneva to order something that would end the war for good. The watchmakers accepted the challenge. What they built over the next 8 years stunned the horological world. On the 19th of January, 1933, they delivered Graves a pocket watch with 24 separate complications. Among them, a perpetual calendar, a minute repeater, and a chart of the night sky over New York, exactly as seen from the window of Graves's Fifth Avenue apartment. A sunrise and sunset indicator calibrated to that spot. A Westminster chime. Every detail of his life in Manhattan was encoded into the gears and springs of a single watch. They called it the super complication, the most complex mechanical timepiece ever made by human hands. It held that title for over 50 years, and when it reached auction, it sold for more than 20 million Swiss francs. But the point was not the price. It was living proof that careful, uncompromising craftsmanship has no ceiling. By the time Patek died, the company held more than 70 patents, 70 documented breakthroughs. Not one came from the hand of a man who had ever intended to be a watchmaker. On the 1st of March, 1877, Antoni Norbert Patek died in Geneva, 65 years old. A soldier, a refugee, a typesetter, and then, against all probability, a watchmaker to kings. His 32-year partnership with Philippe produced watches that defined the very idea of fine watchmaking. He left a name that meant something irreplaceable, and a legacy the whole industry measured itself against. Notice what he never did. He never chased volume, never chased bigger and cheaper. And here is a number that unsettles. Today, Patek Philippe makes about 62,000 watches a year, absurdly few by the standards of competitors who make many times more. A single watch takes 9 months to 2 years, assembled by hand, with every part inspected, adjusted, and tested again. The world around us rewards growth, scale, efficiency above all. Patek Philippe, generation after generation, rewarded quality above all. And the strange, unpredictable, deeply human market rewarded that choice beyond what any spreadsheet could predict. Sometimes deliberate smallness, taken to perfection, beats everything else. One thing done flawlessly is worth more than 100 done merely well. Here is where stubborn devotion to a standard led. Among the 10 most expensive watches ever sold at auction, 9 are Patek Philippe. 9, the 10th is a Rolex. In November of 2019, at a charity auction in Geneva, the Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime, 20 mechanical complications, 1,366 separate parts, a 47mm steel case sold for $31 million. The most expensive watch ever sold, anywhere, at any time. You would think that is the finale. But I have to tell you something almost no one wearing a Patek Philippe today has heard. After both founders were gone, the company came within a hair of vanishing forever. The decades after Antoni's death passed without disaster. Philippe led the craft until his own death in 1894. The company passed through several generations of capable management and kept producing exceptional watches. But the 20th century brought pressures no one had foreseen, and it matters to understand what kills great things. Not war or revolution, which the company survived in Patek's lifetime. It was quieter things. The slow erosion of the aristocratic clientele that had been the foundation. Economic instability across Europe. A world remaking itself with no mercy for anything old, delicate, and irreplaceable. And then the Great Depression, coming down like a curtain at the end of an era. By the late 20s, the collapse was already building. Luxury suffers first and hardest. When people fear the future, the first thing to go is anything expensive and unnecessary. Orders dried up across the industry. Companies that had survived wars could not survive a collapse in confidence. Patek Philippe, watchmaker of queens and emperors, was exposed in a way that a decade earlier had seemed unthinkable. By 1931, the situation was critical. Patek Philippe was on the verge of being absorbed by a larger manufacturer, Lecoultre. Had the deal gone through, the independent brand built from nothing would have dissolved into a conglomerate. Its name, its independence, its face, everything the Refugee had sacrificed for, would effectively have ceased to exist. And then the Stern family stepped in. Charles and Jean Stern, Genevan businessmen, had made dials for Patek Philippe for more than 30 years. They knew the brand from the inside, not as investors over a report, but as people who had worked alongside it for decades. And they understood, with the clarity of long closeness, that losing
And it
Patek
came not
Philippe's
from a hunger
independence
for money,
meant losing
but
something that
from
could
that
never be
same
rebuilt.
standard.
In 1932,
Excellence
the
has
Stern
no
family
ceiling.
bought Patek Philippe outright. And it was not a predatory takeover, it was a rescue. They bought the company not to restructure or merge it, but to protect it, to preserve the standard a broke Polish soldier had set nearly a century earlier. And that intention has held across 3 generations. To this day, Patek Philippe belongs to them, the last family-owned independent watchmaker in Geneva. In an age when nearly every great luxury watch brand has been swallowed by a conglomerate, when giants divide the spoils of high watchmaking between them, and once proudly independent names answer to shareholders and quarterly earnings, Patek Philippe remains free. It answers not to a holding company, but to a standard. The very standard a stateless refugee set when he decided, with no rational reason for optimism, to make the finest watches the world had ever seen. And now, the line I promised you at the very start. In 1996, the Stern family launched one of the most celebrated advertising campaigns in the history of luxury. Quiet images of parents and children, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, intimate moments of connection across generations. And a single line of copy that stopped people cold wherever it appeared. You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. Sit with those words, really sit with them. They did not come from a creative director hunting for a clever hook. They came from the life of a man who spent his entire early existence watching everything he loved be taken away. His country, his father, his home, his first company. A man hunted, exiled, expelled, forced to start over again and again, who learned in the most painful way that nothing is permanent, that the only things worth building are the ones built carefully enough and humbly enough to outlast you. That line is not marketing philosophy. It is Antoni Patek's life pressed into a single sentence. Remember the question from the start: how did a broke Polish refugee become the watchmaker of kings? And was there a trick, a hidden advantage that explains it all? Here is the answer. There was no trick. There was a trait. A stubborn, relentless, almost irrational refusal to
Patek
let any
Philippe,
single loss be the
generation
last
after
one.
generation,
A conviction that
rewarded
the thing he was
quality
building
above
was
all.
worth any sacrifice. The world told him he was nobody, and he spent the rest of his life building the most enduring answer imaginable. The boy who started with a lost country, a dead father, and a chest of useless medals in a foreign city became the man whose name, nearly 2 centuries later, remains the ultimate measure of watchmaking, the standard every other house on earth quietly measures itself against. He built it as a refugee, stateless, broke, from zero, in a foreign country, in a trade he taught himself, against odds no rational person would have accepted. And one final thought, the reason for all of this. I think often about that kind of person, the one who takes the hit and stands up, takes another and stands up again. Not because they do not feel the blows, they feel everyone, but because they decided no blow gets to be the last word. That quality cannot be bought and cannot be taught. It either lives in you or it does not. But here is what I know for certain. Hearing his story will not make you Antoni Patek, but you can make one small decision right now the way he would have. Refuse to let your last defeat be the last word. He did not prove that you can make billions. He proved that where you start does not decide where you end, that the world can take everything from you, your homeland, your family, your home, your business, and still cannot take what you have decided to build inside yourself. Now, 3 things, directly to you. Write a number from 1 to 6 in the comments for the part of this story that hit you hardest. The beginning, where he loses everything, the moment he starts over at 43, or the ending, where a stranger's family saves a stranger's dream. I genuinely want to know where you recognized yourself. Send this to one person you know, the one who thinks right now that their train has left, that at their age and after their failure, it is too late to begin. Patek founded an empire at nearly 40 and closed the deal of his life pushing 60. Your one share could be the push that puts someone back in the game. And next week, the story of a man called a liar and a fraud his entire life. The one who built a brand known to everyone on the
And they
planet
understood,
and hid a
with the
single
clarity of
secret
long
about where his
closeness,
money came
that
from
losing
so
Patek Philippe's
carefully that the
independence
truth
meant
only
losing
surfaced
something that
after
could
his
never be
death.
rebuilt.
You will be surprised whose name it is. Do not miss it. Subscribe, and I will see you there.